A very good afternoon to you, Dudu, indeed. And the proceedings have gotten well underway. And the first part of this morning's hearings, led by Nigel Redman, who's representing the Queen Mother and the two princesses, was that there might be a need to file a recusal application so that Judge Mjabuleni Madondo no longer oversees this matter. They're basing this on a report in the Daily News, which says then that Madondo oversaw a wedding of the late King Goodwill Zwelithini Zulu and one of his wives, and they needed to determine whether or not there would be a need then to file an application for the judge to recuse himself. But by way of answering this particular question, Judge Madondo then asked Mr. Redman that he deals with the relief that is sought to be able to determine whether or not there would even be a need for this application. And part of the relief that has been sought then by the applicants, of course, that being Queen Sibongile Zulu and the two daughters, is that the other marriages, be declared invalid. Well, in fact, that is the second contention that was dealt with for most of this morning, to say, well, the Queen Mother did not explicitly file a declaratory order to have the other marriages with the other wives declared invalid. In fact, the argument that is being made here is that it is done by insinuation to say that because the late king and the first Queen Mother, that being Sibongile Zulu, were married according to a civil marriage, and that was where they'd share their estate in community of property, that by virtue of that then the other marriages would be precluded. But Judge Mjabuleni Madondo pushing back to say, I cannot make a determination on that through insinuation. The Queen Mother would have had to make a specific application then to have these other marriages declared invalid. And of course now the conflict is with the civil, the laws guiding civil marriages and the Recognition of Customary Marriages Act as per 1998. And so the lawyers representing the would-be king, Misuzulu Zwelithini, are saying, well, actually, that is not something that we need to be even dealing with here this morning. One, because there isn't a formal application. But secondly, the main issue here is about the succession, and the applications that have been brought here have got nothing to do with the succession issue, because the correct structure to be dealing with succession to the AmaZulu nation is that of the Zulu royal household, which has already said that Misuzulu Zwelithini should and is the rightful heir to the throne.
Right. And we saw in picture a little bit earlier on, as court was taking a recess, the people who have brought the matter to the courts, the two daughters of the Queen, and I just wonder who else is represented there in court, and what was their demeanor and their action or interaction like?
Well, certainly the siblings of the would-be king, Misuzulu Zwelithini, are all here in court this morning. It was already stated earlier on due to COVID-19 reasons, and I must say I've been told that there are also security reasons as to why the traditional Prime Minister, Mangosuthu Buthelezi, as well as Misuzulu Zwelithini, are not present in court here today. And the two sisters you would have seen, as well as the brothers of Misuzulu, have been in court here today. Well, their demeanor, I think, has been quite calm. They've been listening quite intently to this morning's proceedings, and I think once we come back from the adjournment just after 2 o'clock, then we'll get a better understanding as to whether or not now the question of the validity of the marriages will be answered, because that now is integrally linked with whether or not then the judge needs to recuse himself, because if the issue of the validity of the marriages comes about, then the fact that Madondo could have overseen one of the weddings between Zwelithini and I think it's actually the sixth wife, Lamafu. He oversaw the wedding of the two. Then there would be a conflict of interest for him overseeing this matter. So once that has been determined, then the other issues, then the second part of this matter, of course, which deals with the signature on the will and whether or not it has been forged, will come into play, as well as that application in December, that was made by Prince Mbonisi Zulu to interdict the coronation of Misuzulu Zwelithini come into play, and then we'll be able to hear the rest of the arguments.
Let's perhaps talk about, the consequences, intended, unintended, not to anticipate anything, but our colleague, Karinda Jagmohan, is outside the court speaking to Ibuto, saying, who is this that brought this matter before the courts? What is it that they're contesting? Why are they doing this? We care not for these legal or government processes. We just want the king to be coronated. What is let's talk about the consequences of this court action.
Well, ultimately, what this case boils down to is a conflict between the different laws. And this is something that's already come up in the arguments to say, well, the Civil Marriages Act, the one that is guiding the marriage between the Queen Mother Sibongile Zulu and that of the late king, precludes him, according to that law, from being able to take other wives. But according to, Zulu customary law, it allows him to take other wives. And the argument that was made by Advocate Griffiths Madonsela, who's representing King Misuzulu Zwelithini, is to say that even in her own affidavit, the Queen Mother acknowledges the other wives by virtue of the fact that she even says that while she does have 50% claim to the late king's estate, she would not actually prejudice the other wives. So that in and of itself is an admission that she does recognize the other marriages, but also she did not apply a frontal application which deals specifically with the court having to declare the validity of these marriages. Otherwise, Madonsela says the other wives would have stood up and would have been here in this very court dealing then with the validity of their marriages with the late king. So they're saying this is not even an issue that we need to be discussing here this morning, and this has consequences, of course, because when you look then at the customary law, which then deals with who ascends to the throne, this is the nub of the issue. Here we've got the Queen Mother Sibongile Winifred Zulu, who's saying, well, I was loboled by the Zulu nation, where money was collected from citizens of this nation to pay for her lobola. But then you have the third wife and the late Queen Sibongile Dlamini-Zulu, who was also literally fetched from the Swati nation as the daughter of King Sopuza and was brought together with the late king, trying to rectify at the time what was seen as a historical mistake where two royals should enter into marriage to ensure that the lineage of the AmaZulu nation has royal blood. And that is where you find the debate about would-be King Misuzulu Zwelithini being the rightful heir to the throne comes about, because his mother, there was a specific agreement in the early 1970s that she would be loboled with 300 cows so that she would actually give birth to the heir to the throne. So there is a clash between the laws here, and the court is now being called upon to determine the weighting of such, and then we will see the debate about who in the structures of the royal household, or the structure of the royal household, how the courts here deal with what they have already pronounced on.
Zianda Ngobo, thank you very much for that update. This matter is being heard today and tomorrow. Plenty still to come from our senior politics reporter, Zianda Ngobo.